So next, going to Professor Haroon Ahmed, who will be briefing us about pediatric care and how corona presents in children.
Thank you very much. I believe that I'm audible and the slides are visible.
Yes, I think.
Yes, both.
Right. Thank you very much. First of all, let me pay my thanks to Vardi Vice Chancellor Saab for his presence over here. I think he has left because of another meeting. And also to Professor Bilkis Shabir, who is chair, head of Department of Medicine, and Professor Saira for such a comprehensive overview of the clinical presentations, the investigations, the management, and the preventive strategies, and removing the misconceptions about so many things. Wonderful. I learned a lot from these two presentations myself as well. So moving to what we have to do with the children, I think children fortunately are blessed in a way that the burden of the disease is much less compared to that in the adults. World over, the burden reported is anywhere from 1 to 12%, and here in Pakistan, I think it is not more than 5% if we talk about our national statistics. Moreover, the other fortunate thing about children is that even if they do develop symptoms of COVID, they generally tend to have mild to moderate illness. However, there are deaths associated, and these are because of either ARDS or septic shock or multi-organ dysfunction. And lately, we have seen another phenomena, multi-organ inflammatory response syndrome, that I'm going to talk about. So, although it is less and it is less severe, but we do come across cases of COVID in children, so we need to be careful. No age, as far as pediatric age group is concerned, is barred from having the infection. May it be a newborn or an 18-year-old, they can get the infection. Of course, you all understand the transmission. The two most important areas by which it would be transmitted to adults and even to children is the droplet and the contact. Hence, the three precautions that Professor Bilkis has mentioned, the use of the mask, hand sanitization, and the social distancing. I think the same hold true for the children as well. There has been a lot of discussion and a lot of concern about vertical transmission and transmission through breast milk. There is hardly any evidence about transmission through breast milk, although there are certain case reports now about the vertical transmission. But generally speaking, it is considered that it would not be transmitted vertically. I have already mentioned about the milder symptoms and the less frequency, and this is attributed to so many factors that we have started understanding now. These include a relative higher lymphocyte count, natural lymphocyte count that is present in children. Also, because of their concomitant so many other viral infections that perhaps are giving them some protection, we really do not know, but that is a postulation. And then there are certain things which have to do with the ACE2 inhibitors. You know, the inhibitor where the virus binds, the frequency of these inhibitors in the airways of the children, perhaps that has to play a role in the milder and the less frequent severity in children. However, as has been mentioned by my colleagues earlier, there are chances of asymptomatic transmission. And the other thing, the cutaneous manifestation, varied cutaneous manifestations, Kawasaki disease-like illness, and so many other cutaneous manifestations may occur in children. And the phenomena of what we call hyperinflammatory multi-organ involvement resembling Kawasaki disease is very unique and very peculiar with the children that we come across. And I'm going to talk about that a little bit more. I think you all know the diagnostic test remains PCR, may it be a newborn or a grown-up child. So it's a PCR from the nasopharyngeal secretions or the nasal secretions for that matter that would clinch the diagnosis. As far as the newborns are concerned, it is if the mother has got COVID infection 14 days before delivery or 28 days after delivery, we suspect them, the baby, to be a potential candidate to have COVID infection. So that would put the baby in the category of suspected COVID newborn. Quickly, moving on to a little bit about the management, I would not go into the detail of that. I think Professor Bilkis has very beautifully covered all that. But the only thing that I would like to emphasize later in my slides is the admission criteria for COVID-19 in children. And I'm just going to touch upon the management in various categories. So the important thing is that you need to stage the disease based on the signs and symptoms. And as has been said, it can be asymptomatic, it can be mild disease, it can be moderate disease, it can be severe disease. So the asymptomatic and the mild disease are the ones which really do not need admission in the hospital. They would be better cared of at home. Those who have moderate to severe symptoms need to be in the hospital, perhaps in HDUs if they are severe and enough. The other thing, very important thing, is contact tracing. If you come across one patient of COVID-19, it is very important for us as healthcare providers, as medical students as well, to try to trace the contacts, because by doing that we would be able to ascertain the real burden, and we can perhaps advise more preventive strategies. So that is the other thing that I wanted to talk about. We'll talk about home care versus inpatient patient decisions. But as far as children are concerned, we would admit only those who have got moderate symptoms. And when we say moderate symptom, it means that they have got clinical features of pneumonia along with radiological evidence of pneumonia on the X-ray, or if they have any of the danger signs. And I think there are most of the medical students are here just for their revision as well. So you have been taught about IM and CI, and you have been taught about general danger signs, and the same simple general danger signs hold true for COVID infection as well. So if a suspected COVID child has got general danger signs, lethargy, persistent vomiting, grunting, seizures, not able to tolerate orally, seizures, so these child need to be admitted. The other thing is that even if they have got mild to moderate, you might think of taking care of these children at home. The other criteria would be their oxygen saturation. And I have been teaching the students, and lately I have been saying that there are not four vital signs. Now we talk about six vital signs, and the fifth vital sign is oxygen saturation. And oxygen saturation less than 95% warrants admission to the hospital. We have talked about radiological pneumonia and also all those children, and I'm sure that would hold true for adults as well. All those who have got in chronic illness or who are immunocompromised, who are on immunosuppressant therapies, steroids or chemotherapy, etc., etc., they also need to be admitted, even though if they may have milder symptoms or no symptom for that matter. Not going to into the details of asymptomatic, you all understand, but only thing I want to say is the moderate would be the one who would have radiological evidence of pneumonia, and these are the consensus definition by WHO and CDC as far as children goes. I'm sure adult definitions would be little different. And a severe one would be the one who has got a danger sign or has got any of the signs which suggest septic shock or ARDS or multi-organ involvement. Asymptomatic home care, good hydration, education is very, very important. So we need to be in touch with them, give them support through telemedicine and the other ways, and we can discontinue isolation 10 days since the date of the diagnosis. This is for the asymptomatic patients. For milder symptoms, again, home isolation you might consider, and this is might consider, this is not must for those who have got milder symptoms, the CBC, the cultures, and the chest X-rays, of course, the hydration, paracetamol. You all understand very well. I don't have to repeat or reiterate that we have to avoid the NSAIDs, the ibuprofen and aspirin and naproxen and all that. All that. So these need to be avoided in all circumstances. Mothers are often come to us telling us, Keji, fever is not settling with paracetamol, but it is settling very nicely with ibuprofen. Well, of course, it would because of the mechanism of action of ibuprofen, but it has got its own problems. So we need to avoid NSAIDs in all cases, suspected cases or confirmed cases of COVID for that matter. Moderate cases, they need to be admitted depending upon the circumstances, either single room or they can be cohorted together in the same area, keeping a distance of 2 meters. We need to do baseline tests, which have already been mentioned here. The only other thing is that I would say that in winter season, when we are coming across patients of influenza as well, you might want to consider ruling out influenza infection by doing H1N1 testing. The reason is that this is another viral infection which is very prevalent, especially in children and immunocompromised and in elderly, and would behave similar to COVID infection. And this is one infection for which we have got very effective antiviral therapy. So we might have to consider testing for H1N1. Hydration is always very, very important. We would not nebulize them because it is considered a risk for aerosol generation and spread of the viruses. If the need is there because of the bronchoconstriction, then one would go on to give them inhalers rather than the nebulizers. Other routine antibiotics and antihistamines are all right, or siltamivir if they are confirmed for H1N1 infection. Oh, no, the severe ones need to be admitted in hospital and in HDU. You all understand the panel of investigations that have already been highlighted by Professor Bilkis. I would not go into the details of that. Airway management, and she has already highlighted the importance of non-invasive ventilation. And I tell you that non-invasive ventilation, may it be CPAP or may it be high flow oxygen, work wonders. The other wonderful thing that would work in severe cases is prone positioning. Putting them on their tummy would be really, really very helpful. And here we really do not aim for a very high oxygen. For those who have got severe disease, ARDS, our target would be a saturation of 92%. Of course, ruling out the H1N1 is important, hydration, etc., etc. We have talked about that. Empiric antimicrobials. Now, one thing that I want to say, I know that the recommendation in adults might be little different, but in pediatrics we are strongly discouraging the routine use of azithromycin because this is the only oral drug which is available for our extended drug resistant enteric fever, which is which is very common, and children are dying because of that. So we want to save this oral antibiotic for them. So this is something that we tend to do. Discharge criteria, we have talked about 10 days after the onset of illness and at least 3 days after them being symptom free. And this is for those who have got mild to moderate COVID 19. Remember, earlier on, we were saying that we need to do two PCRs 24 hours apart and we need to get a negative report before their isolation can be broken. But that is not true. The evidence has shown that with those with mild to moderate disease, you do not really need to repeat their PCR. But those who have got severe COVID-19 because of their inherent problems, and they tend to continue shedding virus for a little longer, it is recommended for severe cases that you would do two samples, you would document two negative samples before sending them home. The investigational drugs, we have but tocilizumab is the one which has got now established roles. Remdesivir, Dr. Bilkis has highlighted the pros and the cons about that. Well, the avoid steroid was when we were not sure. But I tell you, as has been mentioned earlier, that if the child is not in septic shock, and again, we're pretty sure that the child has gone into moderate disease, early start of dexamethasone or methylprednisolone for that matter has really shown wonderful results. Case definitions, we really don't have to go into the details of that. Now, this thing, the multi-inflammatory syndrome, which is very peculiar in children, I want to talk about that. It may not manifest with cough, coryza, high fever. It generally tend to present after a certain period of asymptomatic infection. And there might be some people at home who would have acquired the infection, symptomatic or asymptomatic, 1 to 2 weeks before the onset of these symptoms that we are going to talk about. Now, these children would present either as a shock like illness. They would have severe abdominal pain, they may start vomiting, they may have severe diarrhea, and they would present as shock. That is one manifestation. The other manifestation would be of very peculiar cutaneous manifestations: cracked lips, strawberry tongue, peeling of the skin over the hands and feet, conjunctival injection, what we call the Kawasaki disease. They may present with this modified or typical atypical Kawasaki disease, or they may present just with myocarditis like illness. So, all children nowadays presenting with these atypical features, one need to stand back and think, could it be a post-COVID MIS-C syndrome? And we need to do workup for that. I can tell you many stories about children presenting with severe abdominal pain and operated by the surgeons, thinking that this could be appendicitis, but they turned out to have this shock-like disease, etc., etc. So that would be something very, very important. And these children need to be investigated with certain more tests, which including the TROP-I and BPN, which are really, really very good markers to tell you what is happening with the myocardial activity and their function. Of course, echo remains very important. So this is the only condition where testing for the serology, the antibodies would be helpful and is recommended for making the diagnosis, right? So let me repeat that. For all practical purposes, it is the PCR that makes the diagnosis, except those children who present with MIS-C manifestations. Here, even the presence of antibodies without a positive PCR would suggest this syndrome. So of course you need to rule out the other things. I'm not going to go into the details of management. These are the ones again, and as exception to the use of NSAIDs, where you would give them aspirin if they have got involvement of the coronaries in these patients. We have talked about that. I think with that I stop. This is a slide for you to read about, and I can share this Mythbusters with you as well. If there are any questions, we are happy to take. Professor Bilkis, Professor Saira, they are with us. So I think the forum perhaps will be open for the question answer. Thank you very much.